So today's session will focus on using advanced authoring capabilities in our new product, MP Author Professional. Doing the technical presentation today is Mike Sargent, who is on our development team, and Mike will be sharing with you a little bit of the general advanced authoring stuff, but we'll put a bit of focus on using PowerShell as well. My name is Randy Raffi. I'm the Director of Sales. I can answer any sales-related questions, and I've got a few slides I'm going to share with you today. Just before we get started, though, I will mention that we do have resources on the call today available to answer questions. So there is an application within the GoToWebinar where you can submit questions. So I would encourage you to do that. And at the end of Mike's session, we'll also remain on line to answer any additional questions that come up towards the end. A little bit about Silect software. We were founded in 2003, so we've been through the thick and thin of MUM 2000, MUM 2005, and moving forward, we're ready to help our customers as they migrate to Operations Manager 2016. Yes?
Randy, you're not sharing, or at least your slides aren't showing.
Thank you, Mike.
You're welcome.
Okay, you should be able to see my slides now, can you, Mike?
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you. And that's why you have a team doing a webinar like this. Okay, back to Silect. We've been in business over 13 years now. Our solutions have grown from simple reporting, a product called Health Reporter, reported on MUM, did some monitoring, and now we have full-blown authoring solutions to help you create your own management packs and manage the complete life cycle of your management packs. We've also recently introduced the High Trust Pack, and this is a compliance and monitoring application to help you basically track security compliance controls, report on those when they're non-compliant, and then implement remediation. So anybody that's in, say, the healthcare industry that needs to be HIPAA compliant, this would definitely be a product you'd be interested in. We developed this in partnership with Microsoft and High Trust. So happy to share more offline. The Operations Manager products, MP Author, is a free tool. It's great. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that in the next slide. MP Author Professional is our new advanced authoring tool, and just like in this slide, it fits between the free solution and MP Studio. Now, MP Studio, I'll be doing a presentation on that application later today at 1 p.m. Eastern. And MP Studio has all of the MP Author Professional features and more, like version control, documentation, etc. Now, CP Studio, the last product listed here, is our baseline authoring tool, and it has many similar features to MP Studio in that you can test, document, version control, audit reporting for all the baseline authoring work that you might be doing for Configuration Manager, either 2007 or 2016, whatever version of, sorry, 2012, whatever version of Config Manager you're running. Also want to point out that Silect does offer services, development services for authoring baselines, management packs, or helping you just get over the hump with your own authoring requirements. We also provide services around OMS, Power BI, and Azure. We have well over 6,000 users now of MP Author, and this is just a small sampling of those companies. MP Author is a free authoring tool. It's designed to help IT pros get started with developing their management packs. So you can create management packs for your own internally developed applications, or perhaps you have applications where the vendor did not supply a management pack, or you just want to develop your own to monitor and report on a smaller subset of values such as services or specific performance counters. So you can easily do that with the free version of MP Author. Now, MP Author Professional was recently introduced over the summer, and this has a lot of advanced authoring capabilities. So you might have used MP Author, the free version, but you're just left wanting a little bit more. Well, MP Author Professional is is the solution you should be taking a look at. This slide shows some of those advanced authoring capabilities we've added, a full suite of features for authoring SNMP-based management packs. So you can create targets, monitors, and rules for your SNMP devices now. And we'll spend a little bit of time showing you some of that today, but the focus will be on using PowerShell. Okay, so some of the other advanced authoring capabilities, you can create a new class, new relationships, you can create both aggregate and dependency roll-up monitors and process monitors. Overall, it still uses the same cool wizard-driven designer that you're probably familiar with in the free version, but you can also modify many of the settings. So we'll pre-populate a lot of that stuff just to make it a little bit easier for you, things like naming convention. Okay, I'll draw your attention to the bottom of this slide. Until the end of the month, you can purchase Professional for the low introductory cost of $9.95 US per user, and we'll provide the first year's annual maintenance at no charge. Okay, so that's a nice savings. And MP Studio, a little bit about that before I turn things over to Mike and our technical presentation. MP Studio has all the advanced authoring capabilities that we just spoke of, but it also provides the ability to document and analyze your management pack. So a management pack, I think it's safe to say, could be a bit of a black box. It's not easy to see the relationships with other reference management packs. It's not easy to determine the configuration of a management pack and know where all the overrides are. With MP Studio, we provide several reports to simplify that. And in fact, you can set up some automation and publish these reports to a folder on a daily basis, or even have email subscriptions set up so all stakeholders would get a copy, an updated copy of things like audit report, backup reports, or a report on a new management pack that you're authoring, or perhaps you're just conducting a health check or updating an override management pack, and you want to send out an email showing the status of that new override management pack. Speaking of overrides, it's using MP Studio is simply the best and fastest way to create overrides. Okay, you can create them individually or you can create them in bulk. And I'm not talking about just simply doing a bulk enable or disable. I'm talking about implementing a standard value, say for auto resolve or alert priority. So you can select multiple elements, tens or hundreds. MP Studio will discover common properties and then allow you to set a value for those properties in bulk. And you can do that in literally hundreds of overrides in less than a minute. So happy to demonstrate MP Studio in a one-on-one session anytime. I can show you the version control, which gives you backup, the ability to roll back to an older version of an override MP. It gives you the ability to automatically generate audit history and know who changed what and when, and it's all in the store database. So you can also do other cool things like report what elements are running on any given agent, and we'll also show you the effective override configuration. So I call that the silver bullet report. It gives you everything that's running on that box, including the override configuration. Last thing on MP Studio, this product gives you the ability to test your management pack against production data. In its simplest description, you pull the perfmon counters, event data, registry data back from a production server or servers, compare it locally where you're running MP Studio against a configuration of your management pack and or overrides, and you run that test for 5 minutes or an hour or a day, and we'll show you the resultant set of alerts. In other words, how many alerts would be generated if you deployed that management pack as is. So it's an offline test, but you're collecting real-time data, just like you would if you're running perfmon, right? You're pulling that data, comparing it against the management pack, and we can show you the 20% of elements that are going to generate 80% of your alerts. And that's gold. you can use that information to tune those 20% of elements that are going to be noisy and reduce our alert volumes. Okay, my final words before I hand it over to Michael is we have special introductory pricing because of the new product, MP Author Professional. We've also made a significant reduction in the price for MP Studio. But I'd encourage you, if you are interested in taking advantage of this low price, it's only available till the end of August. So happy to do a one-on-one demo. Keep in mind, everything Mike shows you today is available in MP Studio. And you can purchase a single license for $19.95, and that includes your first year's annual maintenance at no charge. Okay, as I mentioned, one-on-one demo, you can email myself or info@Silect or sales@Silect, and we'd be happy to schedule something for you. There is a webinar later today. I'll be introducing many best practices in MP Studio. I'll send around the registration link, and you can use that if you want to register for this afternoon's webinar. On that note, I am now going to hand things over to my associate, Mike, and Mike is now going to tell you all the cool things about advanced authoring in MP Author Professional. I'll hang on, Mike, until we confirm your audio is good.
All right, Randy, can you hear me?
Loud and clear, and I can see your screen.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thanks very much, Randy. Excellent introduction as usual. Good morning, everyone. Well, at least it's morning here anyways. So today we're going to go through MP Author Professional. I'm going to describe and show some of the professional features, but then we're going to do a deep dive and show you how to do PowerShell discoveries and PowerShell monitoring here, so you can get started with those fairly easily. So let's quickly just go through, and we'll create a new management pack. I am going to give it the name. I actually need this to be the same. Silect, if I could type. I'll just call it Silect Webcast. All of our wizards start off asking a bunch of information, trying to populate with some good introductory information for you that you can change. And then there's a final page where we give you a summary before we actually create things. So you'll see that again and again. I'm just going to save this management pack to the file system. Here we get to select which set of references we want. And we have the ability to add references for Windows Management Packs or SNMP. You can actually do both if you want. It's not supported directly here, but it's generally better to have your Windows Management Packs separate from your SNMP Management Packs. There's no reason to have a huge monolithic management pack. And within the two gross choices of Windows or SNMP, you can choose which version of SCOM you're using. The original release version, SCOM 2012, SP1, or as I'm going to show today, R2. We're going to create an empty management pack because we're going to fill it in ourselves. And here's our summary. And I'm just going to click Finish, and we create the management pack. And that quickly we have an empty management pack. So I'm just going to quickly go through and just briefly show some of the available features in Professional. For instance, in Professional and MP Studio, we have the ability to create classes. Now, normally when we create what we call a target, that creates the class and the discovery that goes along with it. And so registry script and WMI targets have been there forever. New class allows you to create a class without a discovery. And this is useful for building your health model. I'm going to demonstrate that in a bit more detail later. While we're here, you'll also notice the create new SNMP target. I'm not going to be showing that today. I've done webcasts on that before. You can find them on our YouTube channel. I'm sure we'll be doing them again. And of course, if you have any direct questions, we can do a one-on-one. The next thing that goes along with creating classes is creating relationships. And so if you're building a health model, a relationship specifies how health flows between, say, various components. And again, we'll show that fairly quickly here shortly. To go along with that, we have the ability to create dependency roll-up monitors and aggregate roll-up monitors. Now, a dependency roll-up monitor rolls the health from one component to another, and you specify a relationship and if the health on sort of the contained part of the relationship changes, it'll roll up to the owner. The typical example of that, and I'll show that later, is an application with both a client component and a server component. You can find that health model, and then you can roll up to both from from client and server to your overall health application. An aggregate roll-up monitor is used to roll up the health from individual unit monitors. So if you're monitoring many aspects, say CPU and memory usage of a particular application, but you only want alerts if anything is wrong with it, an aggregate monitor is a really good choice for that. And we'll discuss that a bit more later. We already discussed SNMP targets, but we also have the ability to create SNMP monitors. Now we have two different SNMP monitors here, the probe monitor and the trap monitor. In terms of terminology, a probe is operations manager goes out to the SNMP device and asks it for the current state of the device and acts upon the results accordingly. A trap is where the device informs operations manager that something has changed or a state is state has changed typically, and then operations manager responds to that trap. And we also have some rules that we can create for SNMP. We have a rule that will go out and probe the device and create events. We have a rule that will go out and probe and create performance information. And we have a rule that will handle traps from the device and create events, and can also generate alerts for those as well. As I mentioned, we're not going to be discussing the SNMP stuff in any detail today. So let's get into this a bit. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to very quickly show you how you could do some health model stuff. So I'm going to create a class. It's not going to have any additional properties. We'll call it Windows Local Application as the base class, and we're just going to give it, I'm just going to call it Application here. Now, all of our wizards use this common naming control. We try to provide a good first cut at a name here. Of course, you can change those. We automatically try to generate the display name that you'd want. So in this case, the full name includes the name of the management pack, but the display name doesn't. You can change that. You can change the description. All that information is easy to change. And we're going to create this class. So there's our application class. And that's intriguing. I wasn't expecting that. I hadn't done this previously, so I'm a bit behind on this. So let's just call this hosted, because an application has to be on a server. So let's just see if that works. We'll go back and change this to application. We do try to spell things correctly on our webcasts. There we go. And I'm just going to also equally quickly create another one for the client portion. And I forgot to check hosted again. So there's our client class, and we'll just create the server one as well. So these would be various parts of your application. Of course, in my case, it's very simple. But once we have that, we can build a health model from it by adding relationships or creating new relationships between these. So what we want to say is that the application contains the client portion, and the application contains the server component. So containment is our typical starting point. Our source class, which is sort of the owner, is going to be our application, which should be right there. And we'll choose our server, which is here. We can show the full class names here. So silect.webcast.application, silect.webcast server, if that's more convenient for you. It'll create the relationship. We give it a good name, you know, the name of the management pack, what is hosting, what is the sort of parent application there, contains the type of relationship, what's contained, and dot relationship, just to name it. I'm not going to bother changing those today. We'll create those. We'll just create the other one for server as well. And so we'll go and find our application again. And actually, I think I did server, didn't I? Let's just do client. So there's our two relationships. So we now have an application that contains both a client component and a server component. And where we get to use that is a dependency monitor. So I'm just going to create a couple of dependency monitors here. So we're going to roll up, we'll create dependency monitors just for availability, but we can create them for configuration, performance, and security as well. We have an algorithm we can use, which is worst of or best of. Worst of is typical. So if anything is in a failure state, then that failure state's rolled up. There's also a percentage here. That's often used for things like web farms where you have, let's say, a dozen web servers, but if more than 85% of them are running, you're happy because some can be down. That's why you have the redundancy. That can be specified here as well. And so here's our relationship. So application contains client relationship was the one we just created. And so that's the relationship we want to use. We have the identification of that, so there's our relationship monitor that we're going to create. We can generate an alert if we want to. I'm going to be demonstrating the alert stuff in a bit more detail later on with the aggregate roll-up, so I'm not going to create one right now. And again, we come down to this. We present all the information about what it is we're going to create, the configuration, the aggregation method, what relationship we're using, and that we're not generating any alerts here before we finish it. You can, of course, go back and change that if you wanted to, and we'll show that a bit more later, but I just want to quickly go through this. So there's our dependency monitor, and I'll very quickly go through and create the second one. This is, just trying to remember which one I did. I think I did client here. Yeah, client. So we'll do the server one as well. And we already used client, so we'll use server. By default, it's only showing the relationships that are defined in this management pack, but we do have a checkbox here to show other relationships. We don't need that. So now, when the health of our server component changes, that health, the availability health in this case, is rolled up to our application component. So it allows you to be in a situation where you sort of look at one thing, the overall health of your application, and see whether everything seems to be working fine, and still allows you to drill down. So that should keep things simplified. So we're going to move on to the aggregate monitors, and to do that I'm going to create two other unit monitors very quickly. I'm using the service monitor because it shows a couple of things. The first is that with many of our wizards we have this sort of page at startup where we let you specify a computer name where we're going to get the list of services from. And that way we can pre-populate a list and let you select rather than having to type something in and potentially make a mistake. And using the browse button you can choose any machine on your network. So you can choose the machine that has the services you're interested in. I'm just going to use my local machine here, and I'm going to choose the ANTS memory profiler service. Our target here, I'm just going to use Windows Computer. I don't want to demonstrate the service monitor too much, I just want to create them quickly. I will generate an alert for them, and I'll discuss why we're going to do that a little bit later, but let's just remind ourselves we're creating an alert. We have our summary, and as I mentioned, we can go back and we can change things, like the priority from normal to high here, so when we go forward again, we have that the priority is changed. So there is our first monitor for the service, and I'll create my second monitor here, the performance profiler, and we'll just use the same sort of defaults here. I will create the alert information again. So here is our two, these row 3 and row 4 here are the two service monitors we've just created. You'll note that under the alert settings column we have alerts specified. And if we look here in the property grid, let me just briefly expand that, you can see that we do have alert messages defined for those two. And the reason I'm pointing that out will become very obvious in a minute. So these are two aspects that we want to consider as one. You know, if either of these is failing, we want to know about it. So in that case, we use an aggregate roll-up monitor. So again, we're going to stick with availability, but we could also roll up configuration, performance, and security. In this case, our algorithms are limited to best of and worst of. There's no percentage here. Target, I want Windows Computer, because that's what the other two were targeted on. And that is important, that the aggregates have to have the same target as the unit monitors they're going to roll up. Identification we could change, but I'm just going to leave that. Here's a situation where we have two unit monitors that generate alerts. We have a choice of generating an alert for the aggregate monitor, so that if either of the unit monitors goes into alert state, we can generate an alert for the aggregate, saying that either have come up. Now I'm going to fill this in very briefly. I'm going to say either the memory or performance. Yes, I do try to make sure my spelling is correct here. Services is not running. And then we have the ability to substitute in information here at runtime. So for instance, from the target, we can put in, say, the principal name. We have data that can be put in for monitors rules that actually have data. Now, an aggregate monitor doesn't have data. We'll probably look at that a bit more. If the target was hosted, we would be able to put in the information from the host as well, and that goes as many hosting levels as it is deep. We also allow you to put in information about the group. You'll seldom need to do that, but it can be done. Put in the group name here. The point here, though, is that we're creating this aggregate monitor and we're creating an alert for it. Now here we have a list of the applicable monitors, the applicable unit monitors that could be rolled up. And these are monitors that have the same target class, which was Windows Computer, and one of the categories, availability in this case, that was checked. Those are the only ones we have, so that's fairly simple. I'm going to select those two because those are the ones we do want to roll up. We have a further choice here at the top. Disable alerts for selected monitors that are to be aggregated. Now our individual unit monitors had alerts being generated. When we've rolled them up, because we've created an alert for the aggregate, we may not want the individual monitors to generate alerts anymore. So I'm actually going to specify in this case we want to disable the alerts from the unit monitors. Click Next. Here's our summary information. In particular, we're rolling up availability, worst of, our target. We list the two monitors we're going to roll up. We do specify here that the selected monitors will have alerts disabled, and of course we have the information about the alert that we are going to generate. When I click Finish, we've created this new monitor here. This is our aggregate monitor. You'll note that the two monitors we already had no longer have alert settings specified. So they are blank here in the alert setting column, as well as the alert message is not specified there. So we have removed the alerts from the unit monitors, and we're relying on the aggregate monitor to generate the alerts itself. We hope that'll be very useful to you. So the next one I wanted to point out is our process monitor. Now, process monitor is used to keep track of whether a process is or is not running. Again, we let you browse to any computer on your network. We'll just stick with my local computer. And here's a list of all the processes that are running, how many instances there are. For instance, conhost has 6 instances running. Right now, let's just look for DevEnd. That's the Visual Studio, Microsoft Visual Studio for developers. There's no particular reason to use that. I'm just using that as an example. We have our targets here, I'm going to go back to Windows Computer. Oops. Windows Computer. We also have our parent monitors that we can roll up to. Now, we have our usual choices of availability, configuration, performance, and security, but we also have this aggregate monitor that we just created. So if you wanted to, when you created new monitors, you can already roll up to those if you want to. We'll just stick with availability here for the time being. Now here's the heart of the process monitor, where we choose whether the process is running or whether it is not running. This specifies how often we check. So once a minute, every 60 seconds, we'll go out and check to see the state of the processes on that server, or each server that this is deployed to, of course, and see what's going on. Now, if the if the process is not supposed to be running, we would detect that the first time we sample this, and we would raise an alert immediately. If we're checking to see that a process is running, well, there's a minimum number and a maximum number here. So let's say I want to have a minimum of 2 copies of Visual Studio running and a maximum number of 3 copies running. There's no particular reason I'd want that. But services that are running periodically can be, processes that are running can periodically restart themselves. They may be down for a bit of quick maintenance, that sort of stuff. So we don't necessarily want an alert when we fall out of this range very briefly. So we also have the ability to specify that they have to be outside of those limits for more than, in this case, 300 seconds or 5 minutes. So we'd sample every minute, but we wouldn't raise the alert until they've been out of range for 5 minutes. Of course, you can change those numbers as low as you want. Sampling too often is not necessarily a good idea, but there's no overhead in having a low value for the alert when monitor is outside of the limit for, like if you set that to 60 seconds as well, it would mean as soon as we detected it was outside of the alert, outside of the range, you generate an alert. We can specify our health state. In this case, running is our healthy state. We'll just leave that. The identification of the monitor, I'm not going to change that at all. We can choose where to generate the alert here. One of the things I wanted to do is look at some of the data here. So let's just put in a good description for our alert here. Wow, that was really bad spelling. Process. So the data we have includes the process name, is running. We can put in the number of instances, process count here. We can say to somebody it should be between 2 and 3 instances. We can also tell people what the target is. It's on the principal name. All this information we already looked at for the target here. I don't think we need to go into any greater detail there. So there's our alert. There's our summary of what we're looking for. We're looking for dev minimum of 2, maximum of 3, running is healthy, and our alert. And now we've generated it. So at this point, we have pretty much discussed everything that's in as a pro feature. Now I want to just create one more monitor for a very specific reason. And I'm not going to go into any detail on what I'm doing here, but this creates a website monitor using the template that's provided by Operations Manager. And one of the things you'll notice is the number of monitors just increased drastically. We went from probably 6 or 7 up to 22. The templates do tend to generate a lot of stuff. It was their choice, and some of it's necessary. I'm not going to comment on the validity of that. But what I wanted to show is some of the additional pro-authoring or authoring features that we have here. One of the things you can check for is missing display names. Now, when we create things normally using our wizards, we always create the display names. You saw them displayed. You saw that you can edit them. Older management packs that were created using different tools or, heaven forbid, Notepad, may not have all the display names. And the reason I created the service monitor is that template does not create display names for a lot of these things. So it gives us this list of elements, in this case module types and monitors and overrides that don't have display names. So I'm not going to fill all of them in, but let's just quickly go here. We can double click, we can specify a display name, and so this is what we call a URL space data source. Yes, I try to spell correctly. And whatever name you want there for a description, anything you want for a description. And of course, as soon as we do that, it removes it from the list here. So it's fairly easy to work through these things. Now, these guys, the error OK stuff here and warning, those are all sub-elements. There really isn't a better display name for those, I think. You know, error is error. The only reason you'd ever want a display name there is because it'll show up in the proper language. If you're an English-only shop, that's probably not much of an issue. But if you're, for instance, Danish, you might want error to come up in a better term in Danish. I'm not sure what that would be. I'm sure some of our Danes could answer that if they want to. But by creating this display name, it can be localized. And I'm just going to close that off. I don't think there's really anything else I want to show there. Verify is a command that runs the SDK verify function. And what this does is looks at your management pack and verifies the syntax level of the management pack, that everything is legal. Not whether it makes sense, but whether it's legal. So we'll quickly go through that, and the verify command always warns about classes and relationships that are in unsealed management packs. These are just warnings, and I typically ignore them because when you seal the management pack, eventually these warnings will go away. It's a choice they've made. But basically, if it's only warning about classes and relationships, then generally I feel you can ignore those. The other thing we can do is we can run the Microsoft Best Practices Analyzer. Now this looks at the semantics of your management pack, which is to say, everything's legal, but does it make sense? For instance, are you doing discoveries way too frequently? Say you're doing a discovery every minute, generally considered bad practices. So the Best Practices Analyzer looks at things at a deeper level and tries to find mistakes that you may have made. While they're legal, they're probably not a good idea. So we'll let it run. We note at the top we have, if you haven't seen this report before, some various sections, individual items that it's checked. And over here, whether it's passed, how many passed, failure, critical, warning, that sort of stuff. And most of these things will pass. You'll note, for instance, management pack elements should have knowledge articles is one here. That's a good one because those are very useful. Some of the others here, management pack elements should have display names. Well, there's a lot that don't. And alerts should have display name. Now, what I'm going to do here very quickly is I'm going to say, let's hide all the items that pass. So when we get down into the details here, it's a little easier to see the things we need to worry about. So, knowledge articles. We've created monitors and rules that don't have knowledge articles, and I'll go out and show how to create one of those very shortly. Some of the other things, the display names. Now, we looked at these before, you know, our errors, OKs, and warnings, those sorts of things, where those would be a good thing to have a display name defined. The final thing on this list is this section called Alert should have name and description defined. This, to the best of my ability to discover, is a bug in the Best Practices Analyzer because each of these monitors have alerts. They're defined, they show up in the console, you can change the alert strings, they all work. It's unfortunately just seems to be a bug in the Best Practices Analyzer. So let's go back to our monitors very quickly. We will choose our aggregate monitor, and we can just simply right click and say create edit knowledge. So here's our summary. One of the memory or performance services is not running. We can choose the different sections to fill in, the configuration. I guess there really isn't any configuration there. They're either running or they're not. With the process monitor, that's where you might put in information about the minimum, maximum, that sort of stuff. So it says stopped or being stopped. There's a resolutions here. Restart the services. I'm just going to hit OK at this point. We now have our tab over here on the properties grid. Well, the tab was always there, but you can look at the knowledge here. That's similar to what it will show up as in the console. And so it's fairly easy to add the knowledge. Okay, so at this point, let's start looking at the PowerShell stuff. In particular, everything we've just discussed is a pro authoring feature. The PowerShell Discovery and monitors are not pro level features. Those are in MP Author. So those have been available for several years now. For a PowerShell Discovery, there's a certain amount of boilerplate that every PowerShell script for Discovery is going to have. And the first line of any PowerShell Discovery script is going to be this param, where we specify the parameters that Operations Manager is going to pass into us. And it's an ID for the source, for the managed entity, and a computer name. And we'll see how those are used a little later. The next thing you'll almost inevitably want to do is create this mom script API object. This is used to do everything in scripting and pass the information back to Operations Manager. It's absolutely essential. For a discovery, the next thing we usually do is we create this discovery data. So this is an object that's going to handle our discovery data. And we pass in that source ID and a managed entity ID so that Operations Manager can correlate this discovery data back to the objects it's trying to discover. The last thing we'll do is we pass the discovery data back, and we simply put the variable name as the last statement in the script, and that just gets returned back to our Operations Manager. Now, for each class that we're going to discover, and each instance of a class we're going to discover, we typically have something like these 4 statements. For each instance, we call this on discovery data object, we call create class instance, and we give it the name of the class. Now, this syntax looks a little weird, but that's the standard syntax you have to use. And in particular, you fill in your class name. Now for this example, I've just put in class name, and we'll see where that's replaced later. But that has to be consistent. It has to be the name of the class you're going to use. The class name also appears down here, and we'll discuss that in a moment. One of the other things you can do is you can add properties to the class. So for instance, with this class, it's going to be derived from Microsoft.Windows.Computer. And we're going to fill in the principal name with that computer name variable that came in. If we have our own properties on our own class, then this is how we add it. We specify this element is the class name / property name, and that gets filled in automatically, and we give it the value we want. And that can be string or integer, any type you want. We'll discuss that in a minute. And then the last thing we do is we add this discovery class instance to the discovery data. And as I mentioned, this can happen more than once, and we'll show that briefly. Once we've created our discovery data, added all the class instances, added all the properties into them that we want, we return the discovery data. So let's look at the actual example we're going to use. It's not much more sophisticated than this. The first 3 lines and the last line are going to look very familiar. What we're going to do here is we're going to iterate over 3 times. We're going to create 3 class instances here. We have replaced the class name from the previous example with this class name, silect.webcast.discovery.class. And we're going to have a property on that. So we also have to specify the same class name down here. And property name is the very uninspired name of my property. You've seen this middle line, and all we're going to do for the property name is we're going to put in component 1, component 2, and component 3. Now, the logic that you're going to put in here is very specific to your application. But in general, you're going to find something, you're going to create a class instance for it, you're going to put in the properties you want, you're going to add that instance to your discovery data, and if there's more than one, you'll create more than one of these instances. For instance, in our last session, somebody was interested in finding log files that were available. So you could have PowerShell go out, iterate over some folders, find log files with certain properties, and add them in here. Unfortunately, that's something you're going to have to deal with yourself. I can't help you with the specifics of that. All I can do is show you the steps that are necessary to do. So let's do our discovery. So as I mentioned, the script target is not a pro feature, it's in author itself. We'll come up here. Our first thing we get to do is browse and choose our script. So I'm choosing discovery.ps1, which is the one we were just looking at. You'll recognize the stuff in particular. Down here is a list of the parameters that are being passed to the script. These 3 parameters are always passed in by Operations Manager, so we wouldn't change them. If you needed additional parameters, you can do that. It's a bit beyond the scope of this discussion, so I'm just going to leave that. Here's where we specify the additional properties that we're going to create on our class. Now, let's copy this from here. I want to fill this in with my very uninspired property name. It is a string property you saw, and we're going to make this a key property. A key property allows this property to help uniquely identify an instance, because the only other properties we had there that we're looking at was the computer name, and there's lots of those. So we want to be able to distinguish between these 3 instances we create. Next thing we have is the class name, and as you saw, we're already using that in the script, so I have to make sure that this matches. This is one of those cases where you really do have to think ahead. Windows Local Application is a perfectly adequate base class here. This is the name of our discovery. This is not terribly important, so I'm not going to change this at all. We're going to target our Windows computer, and as you saw, the script did have some dependencies on Windows computers, so that's our good choice here. Here's how often we want to run that discovery. And there's our summary information, which I'm going to widen just a bit because that third parameter rolls the name of the class we're going to create, the script that we're going to use to discover it. So the name of the script, the parameters that are going in, how long the script can execute. We're going to add one parameter to that, one property to that class, our information about our discovery, what it's targeted at, and how often it runs. And as I've mentioned before, we can go back and change these things. So let's say we want to check this every 12 hours. And of course, now we've updated 12 hours. So that's created our target. So there's our new class that we've created. Of course, you can view and edit the XML if you want to. We don't need to do that, but I'm just showing that that option is always available. And we have our discovery. And there you'll recognize our script, and there's our properties that we're going to fill in, and the parameters that get filled in, all that sort of stuff. So there's our discovery. So for a monitor, just keeping an eye on the time here, monitor also has a certain template that you're going to use. You may optionally pass in parameters, in which case you'd specify them in a param line, like you saw with the discovery. And we'll see that in our detail. We create our mom script API object, always. From that, for a monitor, we're going to create a property bag. Now, a property bag is just a collection of names and values. And we put things into the property bag using this add value method on the property bag object. We give it a name and a value. And then the last thing we do is we just specify the name of the property bag, which returns it to Operations Manager so that we can actually do things with it. In our monitor and our actual example, we're a little more comprehensive than that. So in this case, I'm passing in a file name and a threshold. And what this monitor is going to do is it's going to check this file name to see if the length of the file name, the number of bytes in it, is greater than the threshold, in which case we want to generate an alert. So we have our boilerplate here. We take our file name and we do a get item, which gets us a file object from which we can get the length of the file. Let's scroll up here. If the length is greater than the threshold, then we're going to add two things to the property bag. We're going to add a state variable, and the value will be error. We also add a description. I'm going to scroll across so you can see the majority of the description here. File exceeded the threshold of, and we put in the number of bytes the current file size is, and we put in the length of the current file. If we're less than or equal to the threshold, the state we put in is going to be okay. We put in a description which says we have not exceeded it. Probably no one will ever see that message. But I find it usually a good idea to put in the same information so that a property bag, regardless of the state, comes back with the same elements. Then you can rely on it. The last thing we're putting in is just some additional information that can be useful. So for instance, it's useful to be able to come back and know exactly what the file name was and the current length. Now we put the length into the description, but by putting it in as a separate property, we can do other things with it. So returning a little bit extra raw information never hurts, and finally we return our property bag. Going back to MP Author Professional, under monitors here, we can do a script monitor. We can select our monitor.ps1 script, and you'll recognize that code. Now we have script parameters we have to fill in here. So we have this file name parameter that we want to put in. So we're going to add a script parameter here, and it's going to be file name. And in this case, I am just going to enter exactly that text you see there for the example. It's as good or bad as anything for this demonstration. But it means at runtime we're going to look in a temp folder for a file called test.txt. And we need to know what the threshold is. So I'm just going to copy here rather than typing because you've seen how good my typing is. And for this example, we'll just say it has to be over 1,000 bytes. If it's over 1,000 bytes, we want to generate an alert. We have a timeout here, 300 seconds. Obviously, that particular test you just saw is going to take a fraction of a second. That's a fraction of a second. We don't need to worry about that. But you may have cases where it actually is important to specify the timeout. Our monitor state. Now we only have two states for this monitor, so I'm going to delete this middle state. For our healthy state, I want to come down here and I want to set this to status, or state. I want to make it equal to OK, and it is a string. And for our critical state, again, I want to use the state variable. That is not equal OK as a string. Now, generally I find it's best if you're checking equal to something for one state, it's best to check for not equal to it for another state. Or if you're checking less for one, it's greater than or equal for the other. Try and ensure that the states capture all of the possible states you could be in. Like checking for error here would work for this example, but if somebody ever changes that script to not return error but warning, for instance, then this health state would fail. We're going to target Windows Computer. We're talking let's say performance, because if that file gets too large, things slow down. This is the description of the identification of our monitor, how often we want to run it. We're going to run it every 15 minutes. We're going to generate an alert because I want to demonstrate a couple things here. We are in a critical state that we generate. We can put in information from the monitor. So we have this property value, and we can put in data that was returned in that property bag. And for instance, we have a pretty good description there. So we can put that description in there automatically. And then we could tell people what the file name was, because we did put that in as well. And I think I called it file name with a capital M. I'm not sure if it's case sensitive. Yes. We could do stuff with the length, but it's already, we know that's in the description, so I'm not going to bother with that. And again, we can tell what computer it's on, so principal name here, we could fill in other information if we need it. And we're going to create that monitor. And there we go.
Mike, just a quick word for 3 minutes.
Yep. Well, that actually, Paul, you were 10 seconds ahead of me. That's pretty much the end of my demonstration. Normally, I would go back and check for missing display names and verify and run the best practices analyzer again, just to make sure that things are set. But that's basically everything I wanted to show. So, how are we doing for questions? It's been quiet, hasn't it?
Yep, no questions so far.
Okay. Well, we do have a few minutes left, so if you've got any questions, folks, please type them into the questions section. Paul and I will do our best to answer them. While we're waiting for that, Randy, do you have any wrap-up you want to do? And either Randy hasn't unmuted his microphone or he stepped away for a moment. I was sort of hoping we'd get some questions here. I can't believe that I answered all of your questions. I guess that's the advantage of doing it twice. Some of the things I forgot to mention the first time I did mention this in this webcast. There doesn't seem to be any questions. Randy, if you're there, do you want to do a wrap-up? Now, possibly Randy's on a sales call or something like that. I don't know where he's disappeared off to. He normally goes and shows a few more slides and reminds you of the $19.95 price for MP Studio, available till the end of the month with the first year's free maintenance. Also, MP Author Professional available at that $9.95 US price only until the end of August, again with the first year's free maintenance. If Randy's not back, is there any...
Hi, Mike.
Randy?
Sorry about that, buddy. I had to step away there for a minute, but I realized you're done.
Yeah, well, it's we're just about at the end. If you want to do a quick wrap-up, we've got about 1 more minute. Didn't seem to be any questions, and I finished on time. So
excellent. Okay, I am posting a link to this afternoon's webinar. I'm going to send that out so everyone will have a copy of that. If you'd like to register for the session this afternoon, we're going to focus on MP Studio. I'll show you where the authoring experience is inside MP Studio, but I'll also focus on some of the other best practices, things like version control, auditing, documentation, testing of your management pack. So I'll show you all that cool stuff. And I'm going to now stop the recording. I appreciate, Mike, that you mentioned the special. This is only good until the end of August. First year's annual maintenance is included at no charge, so that's a savings of 20% right off the top. And individual price for MP Studio is like $500 lower than normal. So if you have any questions on pricing, you want to get a quote, you can email me. I'm going to send my email address if you didn't note it on the slide. And that'll be in the chat window as well, so you can email me directly and I can put a quote together for you as well. Okay, that's all I wanted to cover, and thank you very much, Mike. I appreciate your taking the time and doing another awesome webinar. We will share a link so that if you missed any of today's webinar, you can watch that again on your own time afterwards. So watch for a follow-up email. There's also a series of questions, a survey we're going to send out to you by email, and if you don't mind taking a minute to answer those questions, that'd be awesome.
Oh, my pleasure, Randy. Thanks for there. That will be at Ignite in Atlanta, and so if you're there, please drop in and say hello.